Hey everyone, Connie here with something a little different. Um, so I just finished watching some LPs and stuff for Little Nightmares 2, and I have a big theory on these two games. Um, Now this isn't going to be counting any of the comics or anything like that because I haven't read them, so I don't know anything about the events of them. So if any of those end up like contradicting my theory here, oh well. It's just I don't know. Um, but this is a big theory that is just going through my head right now. I wanted to share it with all of you and see what you think. There will be spoilers for both Little Nightmares and Little Nightmares 2 within this video. So just letting you know that, I would definitely suggest either playing the game or checking it out through a Let's Play or something yourself before watching this, unless you just don't mind the spoilers. um, so that being said, we're going to get on with this, and I'm going to try to keep this as brief and to the point as I can. But it might be a little bit of a longer video. Obviously, you'll be able to tell by the time you're watching this. So, just once again, we are about to go into spoiler territory. In three, two, one, now. Okay, so by the end of Little Nightmares 2, you're left with questions and answers. Uh, in the third act of the game, you find out that the final main antagonist is this tall, thin man. Um, and from what I've gathered, his actual canon name is the Thin Man. So the Thin Man chases you throughout the Pale City, and you have to use a lot of different tactics to try and get away, but eventually he does capture Six. So your goal then becomes to rescuing Six, and eventually you do, after having already killed the Thin Man. So after you're then trying to escape from the Pale City as it's crumbling and everything, as everything is becoming corrupted and whatnot, Six ends up dropping your character, named Mono, by the way, and leaving you for dead. Mono is then shown just kind of resigning himself. Excuse that. Mono is then shown resigning himself to his fate, and as time passes and he grows up, he becomes the Thin Man, raising a lot of questions as to what is going on. And then there's a secret ending as well that shows Six learning about the Maw, which was the setting for the first game, which tells us that the second game is a prequel, not a sequel to the first. So, okay, we got all that out of the way, just talking about the ending and everything. So, Mono ends up becoming the Thin Man. What does that mean? And what does it mean that this is a prequel? Well, the fact that Mono becomes the Thin Man basically guarantees time travel has to be involved in this. Because throughout the third act of this second game, you are facing the Thin Man and trying to rescue Six from him as Mono. So both Mono and the Thin Man are existing within the same time period. But if Mono becomes the Thin Man, that means time travel has to have happened. Now, we saw by the end of the first game that there are powers that Six ends up getting in the end. So the idea that Mono, as the Thin Man, could have gained the ability to travel back in time is not unheard of. It's not a completely crackpot theory. So my theory is that after becoming the Thin Man, after resigning himself to his fate, Mono ended up becoming just completely desiring to get revenge on Six. Fueled by that desire for revenge, he eventually discovered his ability to travel through time. He traveled back to before the events of the second game. And my theory is that everything we've seen in the second and even the first game was his doing. The second game paints the world as very post apocalyptic. The first game, we didn't get to see much of the world because it was in one setting the entire time, the mall. So it's like a very contained setting, but the second game actually has a lot more to it. You actually travel a lot further. So it comes across as very post-apocalyptic. Like there's even signs that are similar to like the biblical rapture, where it's like you see clothes on benches and in seats and stuff, and it looks like people just disappeared from existence and stuff. So my theory is that after traveling back in time, Mono created this post-apocalyptic situation somehow. He installed the radio tower that sends out the signals through televisions and whatnot, as you see in Little Nightmares 2. And this ended up initially controlling the minds of the people, but also causing mutations in them. Most people were mutated very simply. Their faces hollowed inward, and they became obsessed with the TVs and the radio waves to the point where if they were interrupted, they would go into a frenzy. These are a lot of the enemies you see during the Pale City level of the second game. And sometimes you'll even have to utilize their frenzied state to deal with them. But then there are also people whose mutations happen to a much greater scale. For example, we see the different major enemies of both games. In Little Nightmares 2, for example, you have the teacher, you have the doctor, you have all these different major enemies. The first game had the twin chefs, and the guy with the long arms, and the face peeled over his eyes so he couldn't really see. You had all these different major enemies. They were like the more high mutations. Um, these mutations were made and everything was done for the pure reason of stopping Six. Having been so just completely overthrown with this desire for revenge, Mono created all of this to stop Six. However, he also knew he would have to get involved because he knows that as a kid, he killed his older self. So, prior to going and getting involved personally to where he would knowingly die, he set up future stuff to help stop Six, knowing that she would escape from this situation. He set up the mall and set up the flyers that she would see that would send her to it. And he had everything prepared at the mall with the pale lady and everything. So this was all for that. And he did eventually go and get involved himself and was defeated and stopped and killed. But it created that cycle again because that is what in the end caused him to become the Thin Man in the first place. And so then you got to ask, okay, so why did Six drop Mono in the first place? Well, this goes back to when the Thin Man originally captures Six. Mono and Six are running from him, and they end up reaching this bedroom. Mono goes under the bed to hide, but Six ends up tripping. She is being like, the Thin Man is like right on top of her, like grabbing at her, and she's reaching out for Mono, begging for him to help her. And he doesn't. Mono does not help her at that moment. She gets captured because of him. So, even though Mono does end up helping her and saving her in the end, she probably had gained quite a bit of trust issues because of that. So when they were running away in the Pale City, she figured that she couldn't trust him anymore. That he could possibly and would possibly betray her again. And that's why she let him fall. Just purely as a survival tactic. And following this, again, it just goes all over again. After the events of this, Six ends up coming across the flyer and going to the mall, and we see the events of the first game, where she goes through the mall. She ends up befriending the gnomes, but ends up betraying them as well in the end, eating one of them just to be able to survive once again. And by the end of that journey, her powers come into existence, allowing her to escape at the very end after having already defeated the Pale Lady. Now, whether this could go to another series of events set up by Mono as the Thin Man or not is up in the air, because who knows how much, by if this theory were correct, who knows how much he could have set up. If this entire post-apocalyptic world is his doing, it's very believable that he could have set up more, especially with his main goal being to take revenge on Six. And it's a wild and really sad theory, too. Like, if all of this is true, then everything in these two games is set up because Mono felt like he was betrayed, like he felt depressed and resigned to death because of everything that he had gone through, and finally at the end being left behind by the one person that he had grown to care for and had tried his damnedest to save. She betrays him at the end, right, like very shortly after he had gone through all of that to save her. So that probably helped add to the just overall feeling of despair that it gave to him. And obviously, I don't know how accurate this theory could be. Again, I haven't read the comics, and there's a lot of other stuff. Like, I don't even remember too much from the first game's DLC, and who knows what DLC for the second game is going to be like. Um, but it just kind of makes the most sense to me at this moment. It's just the thing that kind of came to my mind and just fits. And I would love to hear other thoughts, other theories and stuff. I'd love to see like Game Theory do a video on the Little Nightmares series. Um, but I would also love to hear your theories and what you think of like this one. In the end, that's all it is, though. It is just a theory. It is just my thoughts based on what I saw through this experience. And either way, no matter what the case might be, no matter whether I'm looking too far into it or not, I still thought this game was such a drastic improvement over the first, and I love the first, but the second game improved on everything. And it was just so damn good. And I can't wait to like see what the DLC might have in store. I can't wait to see other people's Let's Plays that I haven't watched yet for it, and so much more. But tell me in the comments below, what do you think of this theory, and do you have your own theory for the events of Little Nightmares and Little Nightmares 2? Let me know down in the comments, and thank you so much for tuning in. For now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.